Mhm.
Flat mirror at the focal point, and you keep reflecting this
Oh, you're saying put a parabolic at the bottom and then have a thing on the top. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me draw, I think, what you're saying. Kind of like that? Yeah, approximately. What's your name? Name? Trevor, yeah. Trevor had an interesting idea, and you can combine a reflective mirror and a transmissive mirror like I do there. Good idea. This is how bifacial solar cells work. There are some solar cells that have two sides. That's exactly how they do it. Good idea. And this is important when you do architectural solar cells because you don't have a lot of space. So you have to kind of design it to fit within things, you know. Anything back there? You guys want to throw out some crazy ideas? Oh, you're saying make this into a parabolic thing? Up as you go up. Yeah. So you have to go up here. Yeah. Yeah. You're saying down here, you mean? No, you keep the box instead of the reflectors coming out. You have the breath. And when you reflect it further away from the box. Ah, yes, I see what you mean. Ah, that's clever. Okay, I see. So you're saying have a mirror here, so that the light comes here and then comes down. Yeah. Oh, you mean here? Oh, here, you mean? Ah, okay, good. Let me just draw that. So I'll make sure I understand. That's cool. Two flip, okay, two complementary parabolas. Yeah, that's the challenge because this will obstruct, it will shadow yeah, that's a good point, yeah. By the way, this is very similar to some large area telescopes that are used for astronomy. They use a primary mirror to the collection and the secondary mirror. And there are specific reasons for that in that case. We won't talk about it, but these are really, really interesting designs, yeah. Anything else before we move on? Anyone want to comment? No? Okay. Okay, good. So at least we know what to think about. Now, of course, gain is only one part of the equation. We also need to think about losses, like where are we losing energy, right? So the three thermodynamic pathways of energy loss: conduction, radiation, and convection. Conduction is simple, right? Of course, you want the heat to be conducted into the whatever is being cooked as efficiently as possible, but because the pot is not floating, it is sitting on something, there will be some conduction losses there as well because it's touching. That's something to be aware of. And then we have radiation losses as well, right? Which we talked about last time. The black body itself radiates and some of the light's actually escaping out of that the cover because it's not perfect. You can also have a situation where this enclosure itself is heating up and it can radiate energy off. And then you have convection, which is, of course, happens where this kind of the air molecules which are closer to the black body capture the heat, become more energetic, have higher kinetic energy, and they move around, go to the colder part and so on. That can happen inside to transfer energy from the black body to the enclosure, or it can also happen outside with the air, right? So these are all things to be aware of and to design for. So one can deal with it by insulating the bottom plate. You can have a better design of the enclosure. You can also have leaks through the gaps and so on, obvious things to think about. Heat storage is the third component in this whole thing, is the thermal mass, which someone mentioned last time, Jared mentioned online, that once the sun goes down, no longer accepting any more, there's no more input energy. How do you maintain the heat? This is determined by thermal mass, is the ability to retain heat. Some materials have higher thermal mass than others. This is the reason why if you go swim in a lake or a pond, it's warmest in the evening, right? Because it has the whole day to heat up. And if you go in the morning, because it has lost the heat, it'll be cold. Same thing in the ocean, for instance, right? It'll be warmest after the summer or during the summer. Anyway, yeah. So water has high thermal mass. But high thermal mass also means it takes longer to heat up. So there's other trade-offs, right? Something to keep in mind. Maybe there are other ways to solve that problem. We should also think about materials requirements, which are all related to those three things that we just talked about. And let's briefly mention the structural materials. How do you build this? How expensive they are? Are they available? Can they handle the climate? You know, there's wood, cardboard, metals, bamboo. Bamboo is an interesting material. I don't know if any of you saw, but there was a recent BBC news show about bamboo because it turns out to be a huge, it's a great construction material, but it's also a great carbon sink. So there's a big effort underway to make big bamboo farms and use that for construction of homes and skyscrapers and so on. Anyway, it's interesting. Insulation is of course important, so it's all kinds of available things, but things like that are locally available are certainly important, and that's important when you start thinking about a deployment of a technology, right? So you want to make sure that coconut husk is available as insulation material. You should take advantage of that. Transparent material, this is probably the most difficult part in most of this. You know, you have glass, high temperature plastics, oven roasting bags, etc. They don't tend to last very long, so that's a problem. And that's related to, of course, the moisture resistance as well. So as some of them mentioned, one of the problems is the humidity will attack all this, the inside of this material, of the enclosure. Okay, of course, there are other design considerations as well. Again, treat this as a simple example, but in your own projects, you're going to have different aspects to think about, but I just want you to kind of think from a very simple perspective. Size. Are you going to cook the appropriate amount of food? Is it for a small family, a large family, a city, or a village block? Portability needs, is it for hiking? Is it on a boat? You know, is it permanently fixed in some house? Cookware accommodation, like can you use utensils that people are used to cooking with? These are all things we don't think about, but when you start thinking about the technology, you also need to start really thinking and empathizing with the folks who will end up using the technology. Very, very important. Sunlight collection area, of course, larger collection area is high temperature, as long as heat loss is not increased. And how do you handle that? Tracking the sun, things like that. Okay, a couple more brainstorming questions. Actually, I'll let you talk for about, actually we're out of time. I'll leave this, oh, you're welcome to stay, but I'm gonna move on to the next slide, but let's come back and answer these questions later. Is a square box better than a rectangle? Anyway, I'll come back to it. This is my last slide for today. Challenges for adoption, things we don't think about as engineers. Does the food taste good? So this is an actual example. People deployed a type of solar cooker in some villages in Africa, and the food just didn't taste good. People didn't adopt it. It failed. And as engineers, we don't think about it, right? So that's why it's important to empathize with the people who actually use it. Temperature control, what about cloudy days? Disrupting traditional gender roles, again, something we completely didn't think about. because lots of women in traditional villages spend huge amounts of time collecting wood and water for cooking and so on. Once they had solar cookers, they didn't have to do any of that stuff. So the time was completely freed up to do other things like entrepreneurship or whatever. That disrupted gender roles and created problems and had some, I mean, in a good sense, but something we don't think about generally, right? So something to be aware of. There are interesting business models also as engineers we should think about, like, can you combine these technologies with microcredit, microloans and so on that you're familiar with, leasing, things like that. And we'll talk a lot more about it when we talk about entrepreneurship. So it's not just the technology, but it's also how it's deployed and how it's used and how it's monetized. Now think about Blockbuster videos versus Netflix. Now, I think most of you are too young to know what Blockbuster is, but in the olden days, you could go to a store and get a DVD or a VHS tape. Doesn't exist, right? That's an example. Or an Uber versus a taxi cab, right? Yeah, can we incorporate solar cooking into home designs and so on? I'll stop here, but I'm going to leave with these questions. We're out of time, so you're welcome to leave, but I don't know if there's a class after, but think about these three questions. Is a square box better than a rectangular box? If it's a rectangular box, which way should be oriented? Is tracking required? You can shout out if you want, but I'm going to stop the recording. Let's see. Here.